One of the great things about being invited by Eric is he said, look, I'd like you to speak at the conference. I said, oh, really exciting. And he said, well, Steve, it's a mobile conference. I said, oh, great. I'll speak shorter. And he said, well, I'd like you to be practical. And I said, you're leading up to something. And he said, well, I'd really like you to actually use examples. And as he said, we're going to get some great panelists here who are actually going to do all the work. But what I'm going to do is set the scene. Because I think the real question is, can mobile startups go lean? We have this great theory, but how does it actually apply to practice? Particularly because your sandbox, in the end for deployment, is fairly constrained. And so what I want to do is just remind you what the theory looks like, and then we'll have the panelists go talk about practice, and I'll ask them a question or two in the middle of their presentations. So there's three parts of a lean startup. And for those of you, anybody ever go to business school or read the Harvard Business Review? Turns out on the cover this month, the lean startup is now jumped the shark and is now mainstream. So the lead article this month was the lean startup. But there are three parts of a lean startup. At least for me, and the way I teach it is, one is you kind of want to understand what your business model is. Not just your product, not just your customer, but all the parts of it. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. But the second part is customer development. Kind of how do I get outside the building and test some of my hypotheses that I've kind of articulated in the business model. And the third, which I'm sure every one of you do, is how do I build my product incrementally and iteratively? But when you hear the word lean startup, there's just three parts of it. And there's, much like any religion, there's kind of different variants depending on who you talk to, but they all kind of follow these three steps. And which one's best? Kind of like asking which is the best programming languages. But here it kind of follows these three pieces. And so let me just remind you, the business model is kind of a diagram, just as a reminder, that says, while you think you're building a product or acquiring customers or generating revenue, what you're really doing is, at the end of the day, searching for a scalable and repeatable business model. And you do that by finding at first the match between your value proposition and your customer segment. Value proposition is a fancy word for who are my customers and what am I delivering to them. That is, what am I building? What pain am I solving? What gain am I creating? And who am I solving it for in my customer segments? What do they look like? What's their archetypes? What platform are they on? Do they pay? Do they not? Etc. And then eventually you figure out all the other components. How do I acquire them? How do I activate them? How do I grow them? How do I keep them? And then how do I generate revenue ultimately from those users I have? And do I need partners, key activities? What are the costs of doing so? The other piece is customer development. That is, how do I do customer discovery, customer validation? Back to what Vinod Khosla said on day one, we've been describing the startup as a search for a business model. The mistake we made in the first 50 years of Silicon Valley was confusing execution with search. If you remember Vinod's comment about no business plan, my phrase is no business plan survives first contact with customers. And for those of you, anybody ever write a business plan? I now teach in multiple universities, and what I explain is, why, yes, we ought to teach business plan writing in universities, but now we ought to move it to the English department because it's the best example of creative writing we'll ever teach anybody to do. Particularly Appendix A. Anybody ever do Appendix A, the $100 million spreadsheet in the back? Whatever the question was, the answer always was $100 million in year 5. No one ever noticed in 50 years in Silicon Valley. No one ever said this. The only people ever to require a 5-year plan on a series of complete unknowns, besides venture capitalists, was the Soviet Union. Right? And we know how well those 5-year plans turned out. So what customer discovery says, startups actually go from failure to failure. It's a big idea. We now embrace the fact that all you have on day one are a series of untested hypotheses. And all the words have now found its way into the common lexicon, minimum viable product, iterations, pivots, etc., are based on this key idea that says we're just starting off with hypotheses. And I use the word hypotheses because at Stanford, my students are paying $50,000 a year, but outside of Stanford, we just call them effing guesses. And that's all you're doing on day one is you're kind of guessing. And now we have figured out that if you're going to do that, why don't we put some rigor around that process? And that rigor is the customer discovery process. How do we test first the customer problem, then the solution? How do we test the product, features, and then test the customer segments? And of course, the way we do this is by building our product with some agile methodology that's iterative and incremental. And so what I thought I'd do is actually bring out some of the speakers and talk about some concrete examples. So let me go back is, how do I get out of the building, when I know I'm going to be in a bound box of an app store? How do I do that in an app store? And if I could, what should I test? How should I test it? And where should I test it? And our three panelists today hopefully will give us some concrete examples. So Matt, are you ready? Ready. Here's Matt.
You have the clicker up there?
Yep.
How you guys doing? I love this guy. We're really lucky to have him here. So I'm the CEO of Sincerely. Sincerely is building a gifting network. And I'm going to tell you guys about basically the first year of our life and the learning process that we went through. So we also have to pay attention. These are converted to PowerPoint. They started as Keynote, so hopefully the animations work. Here's what our product set looked like our first year. Some of you guys may know these products, Postagram, PopBooth, Ink Cards. But what you didn't see were a Facebook app, an off-branded app called Santa Postcards, 99-cent prints, Storyboarder, Cardinal. So we've launched over 12 apps in probably 18 months of the company, and we did that just to learn. Each one of these steps, we were trying to validate a different part of figuring out what our business was. So what did we test? This all started from this opportunity I saw, which was that this iPhone 4 came out, and this thing had a camera better than any phone's ever had, and people were finally going to be able to throw away their point-and-shoot cameras. And as an entrepreneur, I said, what are the business opportunities around this? So I did testing for product and the product solution, web testing to understand the market, mobile testing to determine the positioning and the product features.
So Matt, let me stop you on bullet one.
Yeah.
Okay. So you just assumed there was an opportunity.
Technology changed. I said there's probably a business here.
So on day one, you started a faith-based business.
Yes.
It was a religious activity.
Yes.
Right? And that's what most founders do. But instead of just coding, you did something different, right? You actually decided to test. It's a big idea.
It involves some coding, yeah.
But was this based on experience you had in other companies that said, gee, just sitting in the building, writing code, or is it something you instinctually knew? What, right here, even though you said, I think I know, you also made another decision, which is pretty wise, of I think I know, but I should test.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
The first company was called Zobni, and we took about 18 months to launch our first product in the market. It was a lot harder product to build. We probably could have learned more in the process. We did a small process, but it wasn't as intentional as our first company. We both dropped out of grad school to do it, so I paid more attention this time. That doesn't mean I'm any better at it, but
so it was thoughtful.
It was thoughtful.
Thanks.
All right. So the first product that we did was
trying to feed you these, Matt.
Yes, perfect.
All right.
The first product we did was a Facebook app. So we said this is actually going to be easier to get out to people than a mobile app. And so that's the first lesson to think. Does rapid development, does lean startup work in mobile? Well, actually, you don't even need to start on mobile. Most things could actually be tested on the web first. So we did that. We tested two simple things functionally. Can we get billing to work? Can we get printing to work? And will people pay for physical postcards? This little thing we built on Facebook made about $50,000 in December before we really decided to start the company. Next, we took that idea to a mobile app. This is our first mobile app. It was off-branded, so I didn't put my name on it yet. No one knew we were doing this. One of the key things we had no idea about was App Store marketing. Like, does SEO matter in the App Store? We wanted to learn that. Ends up it really doesn't, by the way. And could we take credit cards on a mobile phone? Are people willing to put them in? Next, Do people want to buy photo prints for themselves, or do they want to send greeting cards to other people? So we launched an app called 99-cent Prints by Mail. Another off-branded app. You could only send products to yourself. It's the first time we actually let you use the photos from the phone, which is the whole thing that we were trying to get to eventually. We learned more App Store marketing. We did some paid user acquisition here. How much does it cost to buy a customer that gives us 99 cents?
And what was the biggest thing you learned?
From this one, well, photos matter. I mean, we learned that, right? The first cards were all like stock images. This one let you actually send a picture of your kid to somebody else.
And people cared.
People bought a lot of them, yeah. Still off-brand at this point. So at this point, we had learned a lot. People wanted to send real photos from their phone. They wanted to send to other people. They were willing to put in credit cards. So we were finally ready to launch a product with our name on it, on our brand, to the world. And that was an app we launched called Postagram. It was our first branded product. And one thing I'll remember from when we were launching this, everybody's like, it works so well. Like, you just nailed the experience. I was like, yeah, like probably 50,000 customers have already told us that.
So by the time you got here, big idea. You had 50,000 customers in off-branded and semi-branded experiences. But it looked to the world like you had nailed it the first time.
Yeah.
You looked like a genius. Big point.
First time
Always
we did,
looked like a genius.
first time we ever did PRs, first time you could actually send products to other people. You could send to multiple recipients. That was actually the second iteration of this product. We started doing cross-promotion. So we had those customers on other products. We didn't want to support them. So we had a built-in customer base to tell about this product as well.
And did you kill the Facebook products?
Oh, yeah, those are all gone.
And did you launch this product? Or
It took off really well.
was there a formal launch?
Yes.
Okay. Right here, though.
Yeah.
And how long was this from your start when you started doing all those other
6 months.
6 months.
Yeah.
So all that other time was just 6 months of intensive out-of-the-building experience.
Yeah.
Great.
And we still use this product today for testing because our biggest business is actually our greeting card business. So we've continued to learn. We learned a lot from that product. It's interesting, easiest way to send a photo in the mail to somebody else as a card, but people wanted more card types. They wanted more text area. And so we invested a lot more into this product. It's now the bigger business. We have a content and holiday marketing calendar. It reuses components from all these previous apps, and apps we continue to build today reuse those components. It's our most profitable and largest business so far. So, takeaways. You can do web testing even if it's a mobile app. You can test the business, you can test the customers. Off-brand testing is a great secret. You do it off-brand or do it in Canada, New Zealand. You can learn a lot that way. Reuse common components to quickly test positioning in markets. One was positioned as prints, one's positioned as greeting cards, one's positioned as postcards. We constantly survey these customers to find the best market opportunity, and we cross-promote and then kill. And that's it.
So let's go back to that last slide. I'm not going to let you get away with that so quick. All right, so let's just start with the one you called out. Surveys. Your tools, anybody else's tools, third-party apps?
Yeah, we use SurveyMonkey.
Okay, SurveyMonkey and how did you get the list of customers?
My roommate had a lot of Facebook pages with a lot of users, so I did a little deal with him where we got to cross-promote to them. That's a great thing about being in Silicon Valley and living with 6 people in a house.
Okay, so hint 1, live with 6 people, okay.
But are all building companies, yeah.
But what other tools that the audience should be thinking about that you found helpful that either you had to create or you used off the shelf?
We were on test flight pretty early for getting our builds out to people. And I'm excited about Gentry talking about what they even took that to a new level, building their own tools. But we use test flight. We use Mixpanel to track user data and also Flurry. We've used more Mixpanel recently, and now something called Looker.
Okay.
What other tools? Surveying is your best tool, and the best tool is living across the street from a mall with tons of consumers. And every Friday we have a scheduled walk over there with a product. I take a product person, a designer, an engineer, and we just go talk to random people, have them push on paper or iPhone apps.
So you truly got out of the building with the product. And they were testing wireframes or paper? Or
paper, wireframes, or full product.
And what were you testing? Were you testing the product or the customer segment or both?
We went to the mall because they were people that like to buy stuff, and that's our customer base. And usually, we'd always pick women. That's 80% of our customer base. And
whoa! Did you know that on day one?
No.
Well, that's a big insight.
Anybody who's built consumer stuff knows they're the ones that spend money and care the most about sending cards and gifts.
But you didn't know that.
No, we didn't. No.
And where in the process did you discover that?
When I started looking at the orders, and they were all from women.
All right. So, Matt, I just want to point out to all of you, this getting out of the building stuff might sound like blah, 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 and you think, I get it, it's a giant focus group. What Matt just pointed out is the difference between a loser and a winner for a business. It's insight out of the data. Right? If you had never looked at the data, though this one was probably smacking you in the face, that's the insight you're looking for. Oh my gosh, I think I'm building it for X, and here it is. Why? Did you change the product?
Yeah, so if you look at Postergram, it's like black and orange, like totally male focused. Ink cards, our greeting card brand, is like reds. It's much softer. It's for women. So
Great.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you, Matt.
Yep.
And who's next? Is it Gentry? Yeah, come on out.
Hi.
This is Gentry.
Thanks for having me. So I think we have a phone demo here. Oh, cool. Yeah, so my name's Gentry Underwood. I now work at Dropbox, but previously was the CEO of Orchestra. And I think we're probably best known for a product that we launched a couple months ago called Mailbox. I thought maybe just for the purposes of setting in context, I could very quickly show the kind of video we used to talk about it. Let's see if that works real fast.
Well, I feel like an old hobo on the side of some blue. I was fair as a summer day. Now the summer days are through. You pass through places and places you pass through. You carry them with you on the soul.
I'm going to go ahead and not do that because it's not playing right. I'll just give you a demo instead. Mailbox is basically a very... How many people are familiar with Mailbox? Should I do a... Okay, I'll do a quick thing. Mailbox is basically like a very friendly and fast way to do mail on your phone. One of the things we discovered when we were building the product is that the number one use case for email on a mobile device is it's really triage. It's taking those couple of minutes you have while you're waiting for your coffee or sitting waiting for someone to meet you or whatever to go through your mail and quickly decide what's in there that I need to deal with, what do I really never need to see again I can send to my archive, and what do I need to put off till some other time? Maybe I need to get back to something tomorrow or next week, or just maybe when I get back to my desk later today. And so we designed a really simple, lightweight system that allows people to quickly move through their email and basically changes your relationship to it, where effectively, rather than feeling inundated by this flood of mail coming in all the time and doing things like marking messages as unread as a way of hacking the system to make it more usable when you get back to your desk, we tried to build a mobile-first tool that sort of changes that relationship. But I think what makes this product interesting from the context of today is that getting here was really a series of failures and iterations. So Mailbox began as Orchestra, which was a shared to-do list. The idea was that a couple of things. One, at the time, there was not a to-do list on the phone shipping natively. But the other was that when we looked out, my co-founder and I, Scott Cannon, when we looked out at how people were collaborating, we saw that email was effectively being used almost universally as like a terrible to-do list. That people had all of this stuff trapped in their inboxes. And the reason it was trapped in their inboxes is because it came from somebody else. So we started playing with this idea that maybe we could create a to-do list that was collaborative in its nature, where you could send someone else a task and have chat around that task to get it done. And maybe by doing that, people would skip sending one another emails. And we launched with this idea with a product called Orchestra To Do in September of 2011. And it was pretty well received. People got very excited about it. But as we looked at the data, we saw that drop-off rates were fairly high. And we began to spend some time trying to figure out what we were going to do about this. How could we make the product stickier? And that process over time helped us to realize a couple of things. The first was this realization that to-do lists themselves, or this product, basically has a bit of a diminishing return. It feels really good to take all of your life and dump it into this list of things that you're going to do. And at the very beginning, there's a lot of psychological reward there. But no one ever finishes everything on their list. And so over time, you get this sort of detritus that builds up of stuff that's nagging you that you really should be dealing with. And so you go from being excited to use the tool to feeling like, oh, this isn't something that I want to go back into. That's not the feeling you want to give someone when you're trying to get them to use their product. So we began working on ways to fix that. And one idea that became very exciting to us was this thing we started calling a deferral engine. basically, we saw that people were using Orchestra and organizing things into today, soon, and someday. And the someday list just kind of lived on forever, but it sat there staring at you. And so we imagined a world where you could very easily push a task off to a later time, and then that task would effectively come back in at whatever time or place you had told it to. And by doing that repeatedly, you could get to a place where there wasn't a list staring back at you, but you could keep kind of a blank slate at all times. We started calling this a euphoric inbox. The next thing that we realized as we worked on that was that if we were going to do that, we needed a quick way to make these decisions so that you could act on every item as it came in. And we looked at some of the best interfaces we could find and saw that gestural UI was really taking off and began to incorporate swipes as a way to make processing your to-dos even faster. And the last piece we were worrying about is trying to figure out, sorry, these are getting clipped too, trying to figure out how we get stuff into the system as quickly as possible. And we worked on lots of different interesting ways to quickly create tasks. But this basic insight that we had started the company on was still kind of nagging at us, which was even our most avid Orchestra users still had lots and lots of stuff trapped in their inbox. We had ways to forward an email to Orchestra to turn it into a task, but it was slow. It was laborious. I remember one day I was on a new phone. I got an email from my wife asking me to look at a couple of different eBay auctions for a toy we were looking at for a kid. And I couldn't deal with it at the time, and so I forwarded it to Orchestra. And there was this moment of realizing, as I was typing out forward tasks at orchestra.com, this was massively failing our speed test. And so if we were really going to build a system that created this euphoric kind of experience, we needed to back all the way up and look at this original hypothesis. You know, we had started this company on the realization that people used email as a terrible to-do list. Maybe instead of asking them to go out of their way and use a new tool, maybe what we could do is transform that inbox in which all that stuff lived. And that took us to this place where we began thinking about Orchestra as a hybrid email task system where you could sort of easily move between the two and intermix them. But as we tested this with people over and over again, we saw that it was simply too much for people to get their heads around and a lot for us to design in a clean, simple way. So as the product itself was pushed through more and more iterations, we found more and more of the task-related content falling off. And we ended up finding ourselves in a place where effectively more and more what this app that we were working on was looking like was actually an email client. And so at some point we backed all the way up and realized what we were building was not Orchestra version 2.0. It was a product that really needed its own brand. It really needed its own story. It needed to be described and explained and talked about in a different way. And that took us to the place where the product evolved and went to market as Mailbox. And I guess since we've launched, and maybe this would be an interesting thing to talk about, people talk to us a lot about the pivot as this, and there's the sense that we went back and decided we were going to go to square one and just start over and try something new, but it never felt that way at all along the way. It was simply a lot of much smaller incremental steps based on interacting with people and seeing.
So we're going to save my questions for you for when we have a panel. This was a great discussion of the product, but I think for the audience, what I'd like you to think about as we're sitting here listening to Dina is, what were the things you did when you were building Orchestra outside the building, if any? And what were the things you physically did? Tools, things, processes, tests, etc. So let's save that for when we have a discussion. And thank you very much. Perfect.
Hello. Is this the clicker?
Yep, you're it.
All right. Awesome. There we have it. All right. Hi, I'm Dina. I am the CEO and founder of Wanelo. Wanelo comes from Want, Need, Love, and we are an online community for all of the world's shopping. So lean startup to me is these three things. This is what I took from learning all about it. So learning faster, it's just about shortening the cycle to learning. It's about learning first, building second. So your initial goal is not to build a perfect product, but really just to build a product from which you can learn. And then building the right thing, which sort of comes from the first two things. So in our particular history, we started on the web. I started building Wanelo on the web, and it actually was not a typical, lean startup type of a thing because I actually didn't know about lean startup back then. So I made all the mistakes myself, and I think that might be a common theme actually. So 2 years of mistakes, 2 years of launching product around the same vision but executing very differently. And we were on the web first.
What was your biggest mistake?
I mean, the whole thing was a mistake.
But you're still in front of us, so.
One quick example is a thing that really stands out in my mind is a particular search feature that I paid $30,000 to build, like $30,000 of my own money, that I then tested and realized that it's not working, it's not going to happen, and
Could you have
we have to
figured
let
that
it go.
out first?
Not at that point, right? So that's the old days of when I didn't quite wise up yet. So luckily I stuck with it, 2 years of experimenting until finally a version that was minimalist enough. I basically went through what we had, removed a lot of crap that we built that user testing showed it wasn't working. And so I faced the hard truth, removed all the features that weren't working, and ended up with a very clean sort of minimalist approach to products and people, the two things that I couldn't remove. And then we started seeing this, early signs of passion. So what I'd like to say about this is that I think qualitative feedback is actually underrated in our community. A lot of people talk about growth hacking. A lot of people talk about metrics. I love metrics. I love analytics. But to me, as a product designer, qualitative feedback was always incredibly critical. And I know now that some of the early passion that we started seeing in the very beginning of the product that was working, really led us through. There's a very continuous line to where we are today with that passion really building. And of course, we get a lot of kick out of it. This is a technique that I personally use to simplify everything I do, and I think it's very much aligned with the lean startup methodology. It's a technique that basically, forces you to find out the one thing that really matters. In a startup, as everyone knows, in a startup or in building a product, you're going to deal with a ton of complexity. There are going to be endless details of all kinds. And what I like to do for myself is clearly understand what is the one thing that really is going to make the difference on all sort of levels of the product and the business. And then once I know that one thing, I can put my entire energy on that. And when it comes to product and knowing what to test, when it comes to knowing what feedback from users is important, what feedback is not, this is sort of my beacon. And then once you know what the one thing that matters is, then you just remove. You basically don't build a lot of things. So this is one thing that I think I have learned to do really well is not build things like this. Forgot password. So when we initially launched our mobile app in August of 2012, it was lacking all of these basic core functionalities. So users could not restore a password. They could not edit their collections. They could not even remove the products that they saved. Editing bio, forget it. Categories, no way. So none of this stuff was there. And we didn't launch with a launch or any PR. And I think that launching when you're ready is really important. Waiting until you have already understood your user, you know what's important, and you can really be in control of the launch. And you know that it's going to work is the way to go. So don't be airtime. Something that I've learned is absolutely critical for mobile experiences in general, but also probably for web products as well, given the number of choices that users have today, is providing immediate value. So the Wanelo product will give you an endless feed of products from all over the web that are really interesting, really unique, and you have to do very little work to get there. So you can kind of instantly get engaged and start browsing. And this is just for entertainment. These are two ridiculous tweets that I've come across recently that came from our community that I thought were worth sharing just for their ridiculousness. And this is sort of the continuation of some of that early qualitative feedback that we were seeing from users. And there we have it.
Great, thank you. So I think we have a couple minutes for me asking the panel some questions. And generally, let me start with the questions I left you with. You know, Matt went through kind of the, you know, he tested on Facebook, he tested on the web, he did off-brand by dissing Canada and New Zealand in the same sentence. I thought it was great. You know, entire countries are no longer mainstream. And then he listed a set of startup tools that he used, which I thought was incredibly practical. Can we start with the tool side first with you, and then maybe go back up to the other list?
Sure.
Did you use any third-party tools?
We did. I mean, we were heavy users of both Mixpanel and TestFlight.
Okay.
Obviously, there's a lot of limitations on how you can test mobile devices, and Apple, generally speaking, limits developer tests to 100 devices. There's some unofficial ways of getting around that, but both TestFlight and Hockey App were different ways we had tried for distribution. A lot of people use enterprise distribution for that as well. Mixpanel is something that we relied heavily on. It can be quite magical in terms of letting you look across a broad swath of users and figure out what they're actually doing in your app. It can't tell you why they're doing it, and so we combined that quantitative work with a lot of qualitative work, spending time with our early testers, watching them use the app, doing a lot of paper prototyping. My background is all from IDEO, and rough sticky note and paper-based prototyping is like the bread and butter of design. So we would run people through all kinds of concepts before we ever put anything on the phone. Also using basically live screen sharing software that allow us to move through a keynote presentation and pretend to be using it on the phone. Something called Live View by a guy named Nick Zambetti we use all the time.
So that was a live view?
It's called Live View. Yeah.
And it was just to dummy up a...
Basically what it does, it puts a little version of your iPhone on your screen, on your computer screen, and you can move it around anywhere you want. And whatever pixels you see on that dummy version of the iPhone you also see on a real iPhone. So you can hand someone that iPhone and then page through a keynote presentation or in some other way, you know, fake a software UI.
So let's go back to the top. On day one, was this a faith-based enterprise, or did you actually have a technical idea, or was this based on your experience at IDEO of a problem you wanted to solve? Where'd this come from?
So my co-founder and I was at IDEO, he was at Apple, and we both were interested in the idea of building a startup around taking the friction out of work, trying to find some place in collaboration where we could smooth working together. And we didn't really know what we were going to do. We tried lots of ideas. I'd say the one that got us to put in our resignation notices at our companies and actually take the leap to go try and start something was this realization in talking to people that so ubiquitously email was being used as a to-do list. And just what a crazy thing that was, because nobody's tools were actually designed for that.
So how many people did you talk to before you quit around this idea? 200, 2,000?
Probably somewhere on the order of 50 to 100.
And that was enough? You were hearing something consistently?
Yeah.
And then did you just code up Orchestra, or how did that work?
Well, we started doing a lot of paper prototypes. We used Sencha as a way of doing an HTML-based prototype and built our first shared to-do list on Sencha. And that taught us...
Sencha is
basically a mobile framework that allows you to build HTML-based apps.
Okay.
It was both good for us in sort of helping us vet this concept of creating a task and delegating it to someone else, and also a strong reinforcement of the idea that it's very hard to distribute something when it's HTML based, because the app was very slow in a way that would keep people from actually using it.
Got it. And were you testing this with users outside your company, or just yourself at this point?
There was only like 3 or 4 of us in the company, so we pulled in all sorts of friends and families. And part of that challenge there is when you're building a social app, you're really testing not only the usability of the software itself, but you're testing the human-to-human interaction that's being facilitated through that software. So we had to find pods of people that were already trying to work together in different ways, couples, roommates, groups of friends, coworkers, and try and set this test software in those contexts and see if the things that they wanted to do were being facilitated by the UI that was being designed.
And any surprises about the initial segment you thought would be interested versus what you found while you were testing?
Yeah, so the hope was, since it's a social to-do list and we all in some way, shape, or form work with one another, the thing would spread virally. What we found is it worked best with dyads, with couples. And that's great for couples. There's still a lot of couples that love Orchestra. And
so it's a virality of one, like one person.
It doesn't really spread too well. It makes it really hard to grow.
And so then Orchestra became Mailbox because of that learning, or?
I think the two learnings that took us from Orchestra to Mailbox were realizing that the to-do list itself was a flawed product, a product with a diminishing return. People declare bankruptcy on their to-do lists all the time, and pretty consistently the retention rate of, we looked at other people's products and we saw very similar retentions to ours, that I'd say 5 to 10% is a pretty good like long-term retention for a to-do list.
So going from Orchestra to Mailbox wasn't a pivot, it was almost a restart.
For us, it was really very much an iteration.
Tell us why.
Well, the first step was recognizing that we needed to get all those tasks off of your list so they stopped staring at you. And so that's what gave rise to this vision for a deferral engine. But then the other one was realizing that at the very beginning we had made a mistake in our business model. That we had assumed that because people use email as a terrible to-do list, we could get them to use a great to-do list. But actually what we needed to do was simply transform the tool where all that email was already coming.
And for the same customer segment or a new one?
For the same customer segment.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Tina, can you start with, let's do the same thing, start backwards with the tools. Did you use any third-party tools? Or?
TestFlight is really big for mobile, of course.
All right.
Mixpanel, I'm not sure that I would think of Mixpanel as a testing tool per se. I mean, you get analytics. Of course, you could do A/B testing. The initial audience for the web, which not exactly the topic of the conversation, is that we did some Facebook advertising. And
I think that's a great conversation because it'll segue us into
first users.
Your first users were on the web.
Right.
Was that because that's where you thought they would ultimately be, or was that just the first platform you decided?
So I started working on Wanilo in 2009.
Oh, wow.
Mobile just wasn't really on my mind. Yeah.
And do you still have a web platform, or
We do.
Everything has moved to the web?
Most of our growth is on mobile, I would say. Yeah.
And was that a surprise or something you knew was going to happen? Or?
Users were essentially demanding an iPhone app.
An iPhone app?
Yeah.
Are you on
So that
Android as
happened.
well? Or?
And then once we launched the iPhone app, then they started demanding the Android app.
Okay. And how did you test, or did you test? Was it testing product or customer or both? What were you doing outside of your building?
So on the web or mobile?
Both.
Either way.
Just tell me the story.
I think my story is that it's very driven by vision for me. I mean, so very much this like faith and commitment. Like I just believe that this is how the world needs to be.
Right. And excuse me, let me remind all of you that when you do a faith-based enterprise like our founders here, you're betting it's a vision. 90% of the time it's a hallucination, just to let you know. The good news is we have the visionaries up here. They're the ones who get to tell the stories. The rest of you guys, you don't get invited up front when it turns out to be a hallucination. That's why you want to test this stuff, because when you do fail, it'll be quick and inexpensive. And in fact, it's a very quick iteration. But let's keep going.
So vision first,
Yep.
and then execution second. And execution is where I think I really do apply Lean Startup.
Okay.
So the vision for me hasn't changed. Execution was changing drastically all the time.
Great. And what was the biggest learning?
The biggest learning is simplify, remove. Your first experience needs to create value right away.
Right. And was there a set of events, or just it came out of the data, or somebody walked up to you?
Right. So we were on the web. I'd been building basically for 2 years.
Right.
I had a lot of features that all were in line with the vision, right? So user reviews, user uploaded photos of products, everything that actually probably will eventually end up being a part of the experience.
Right.
But these features were too unfocused. And so usertesting.com, in-person conversations, knowing the fact that my parents did not care to use this platform, were all sort of pushing me to finally face the fact that it wasn't working. And at that point, I just sat down and started saying, well, this thing people aren't responding to, so why don't I just remove it? And
Right.
what if I remove that other thing? And, so I just kind of went on this rampage of removing things. And then the two things I could not remove were products and people. So that's how I ended up with a minimalist vision.
That's great. Well, thank you. And just to wrap up, any final comments, Matt or Gentry?
Just because I haven't spoken this part, I don't need to. I love both these people. I'm glad they're here, and I think you guys did a great job.
Yeah. And Gentry, last comment for you want our audience to remember?
Well, I might take a little bit of task with the vision thing. I think it's hard to know early whether it is a hallucination or not, but startups are so damn hard that unless you really believe in what you're working on, it's just hard to stick with it.
Right. Yeah, anything else?
I would say find the one thing that matters and focus on that, and don't build anything else.
Great. And I want to thank you guys, and just remember, you know, I will guarantee that you're all the smartest people in your building. The game is that you're not smarter than the collective intelligence of your potential customers. And so make sure you include them in your products. So thank you very much, and thanks for your time.